Welcome to the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. I'm Dr. Lori Marvis, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Yami. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Yes, it's a blast to have you on. I remember from the first time I met you years ago, and just you just have this exciting and energetic personality. It's so much fun to talk to you, and I can't wait to hear about your book and everything that you're doing. So let's just dive in. Let's
All
first of all
right.
just tell little people a little bit about you, where your practice is, and kind of how you got started with writing your book, which is a really cool topic.
Sure. Well, I am a primary care pediatrician and I own my own practice here in Yakima, Washington, which is central Washington. And what I like to describe it as is I practice primary care pediatrics with a lifestyle medicine emphasis because I started my career in a community health center, which was awesome. And I got lots of great mentorship and lots of great experience. But what I found lacking is I just didn't have time to talk to patients about lifestyle medicine. And I knew that that was like the key, like the foundation of health. And so I didn't feel like I was helping patients the way I wanted to. I didn't feel like I was living up to the full potential of a physician. And so that's why I started my own practice so that I could have time to actually counsel patients about diet and movement and sleep, which, is a huge thing that is important for babies all the way through the end of life. So now I get to do that. I'm also a certified health and wellness coach, which has brought in a whole nother component to my career and my practice. I see a whole different way of talking to patients and their families. And so I think that that has been very enriching as well. But the reason I wrote my book, A Parent's Guide to Intuitive Eating, is because even though I am an expert in plant-based nutrition, and I talk a lot about diet and nutrition, and I talk to parents about feeding their kids, I felt like there was a piece missing when it comes to feeding our children and feeding ourselves. And that is learning to tune into our bodies, letting go of the whole diet culture, diet mentality, and also understanding a little bit more about health at every size. And so that's why I felt inspired to write my book. And it really just helps guide parents through how to feed their children, what to feed their children, but also some lifestyle medicine principles about stress and exercise and sleep. And so, yeah, it's a little guide for that.
Awesome. So what do you mean by intuitive eating? What does that mean? Because intuitively, someone might want to eat a hamburger or French fries or chips all the time. Where do you intuitively eat healthy, I guess? How does that work?
Yeah. So intuitive eating is very misinterpreted that way.
Mm.
And actually, it's a concept and a phrase that was coined by two dietitians. And they actually came up with this a long time ago, like in the 80s. And they
Mm.
wrote their book in the 90s, which is entitled Intuitive Eating. So they are the grandmothers of this whole movement. And it doesn't mean intuitive eating doesn't mean that you intuitively know what to eat based upon like what nutrients you need and stuff like that, even though they have done some super fascinating studies on children and what they choose to eat if they're given like no cues. It's super
Mm.
fascinating, but that's not really what it means. What intuitive eating means is that you give yourself permission to eat. You honor your hunger, you honor your satiety, and you let go of all of these external cues and external pressures to eat a certain way.
Mm.
And the reason this was so needed then, and especially now, is because we've started to believe that we can't trust our own bodies, that
Mm.
we need a menu plan, or we need some kind of calorie counting, or we need to follow macro counting. And if we don't do that, we are just inherently going to overeat or be wrong or be bad or be the wrong size or whatever. And so, really, what intuitive eating is, and what these authors, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, they made 10 principles for this to help guide people through relearning intuitive eating, because children are born intuitive eaters. They already
Mm.
know when to eat and when to stop eating. But parents tend to not trust that, especially starting around toddlerhood. The parents are like, no, I think you need to eat more. You didn't eat enough. So eat more. And actually, you need to eat this and not that. And so then we start pressuring our kids that we find that by the time that they're 5, they've lost that connection to their body. So intuitive eating tends to start dropping off around age 5, because we've, for about 4 years, pressured them either to eat more or to eat less. And we're just like micromanaging and controlling their eating. So when it comes to the parent's perspective, and in my book, I speak directly to parents, I want them to start trusting their child. Now, this doesn't mean that you just have a household full of like Doritos and goldfish crackers. I pick on goldfish crackers so bad. Hopefully they don't come after me someday, but that's not what that means. It means you as a parent, you're still responsible for choosing the health promoting foods. It's still your role to decide what, when, and where. But then you step back, your job is done. And then it belongs to your child to decide if and how much. Because often what parents do is they cross over into the autonomy of the child and say, no, you need to eat more. You need to clean your plate. You need to eat all your broccoli before you get dessert, all of this. And then that interferes with the natural intuition that the child has.
That's very, very important, because that actually will carry over into adulthood, right? All of those habits, those thoughts, those beliefs that you're basically creating, it's a belief mode, at least with my experience with my adult patients. Very same thing. We'll start talking and trying to dig deeper into why they keep eating beyond satiety, right? Satiety, they're not hungry, but they keep eating. And it's like, well, it's just like this drive. When I was a kid, my parents always said this, or, my parents always did this, or, there's always some experience when they're younger. So if you're a parent and you've moved into that, kind of crossed into that gray zone of, not allowing your child to understand their own intuitive concepts of eating and when they're full and things like that, how do we go backwards? Like, what is the road back to allowing them to define that for themselves?
Well, the good news is that no matter how long you haven't been an intuitive eater, you can relearn how to be an intuitive eater. So I think the first thing is for parents themselves to assess, am I listening to my body? Do I trust my body? Or am I on a diet? Am I counting my macros? So it really, first of all, is the parent to learn, do they know how to eat intuitively? And if not, then maybe for them to start practicing those principles. And then the second thing is to just start letting go of the control that they have over how much their child eats. It takes practice. Nobody is perfect. I can't even say I'm perfect, because I do have one child who's more selective. He's leaner, he's smaller, so he doesn't need as much energy. But in my mom brain, sometimes when he has one bite, you sometimes go into freak out mode thinking something bad's going to happen. And so I know that parents have this, but it's really about taking a deep breath, biting your tongue, and then just letting it be. And usually what happens, the next meal or the next day or something, they will regulate. That's because that's what the human body does. The human body knows how to regulate its intake for what it needs, for its energy needs, and those kinds of things. So we just have to learn how to trust. So it's just step by step, taking a step back, letting the child have control over that aspect of their eating. And it's not like you're letting go of control of everything, because you're still deciding what you're going to serve the child. That's very, very important. You don't want the child to cross over into your autonomy either. So I don't recommend this short order cook thing where the child's like, nope, I don't want this. I want you to make me a grilled cheese. That's not their job. Your job is to decide what you're going to feed them. Their job is to decide if and how much they're going to eat of that food.
Right. Absolutely. So when I was in medical school with 3 little kids, and I was raised this way too, actually, my parents were just too busy to be busy into my business. On occasion, they might say something like, why don't you eat your stewed tomatoes out of this, whatever. I was like, because I just don't like them. But, if you're a medical student, you have 3 kids and they're whatever, you're like, I fix one meal. It's a healthy meal. It's set in front of you. If you don't eat, you'll eat tomorrow. I know you're not going to allow yourself to starve. And that worked out great. These kids are healthy, lean, all plant-based eaters, and honestly, they're not picky.
Yeah.
So, and they're in their 20s now. My oldest will be 27 in a month. So,
Wow.
that is the amazing thing about allowing your child to pick it. And honestly, I was just forced into this. I'm sure when they were little and I had more time, I was a little bit more directive, but it's exactly right. It's so right. But it's funny, but now it's like being mindful of your eating. It's just a mindful eating practice. How do you, as adults, right? So I know how I work with my patients, but what are some of your advice to parents when you're asking them to go back into more intuitive eating? Is there anything that you've learned, or maybe those 10 principles? How can we start learning ourselves? Because we have so much going on here. The talk between our ears is just like, so.
Yes. Well, and this might be a little controversial for some people, but I think that the number one first thing you have to do in order to relearn intuitive eating is to stop trying to control your body size.
Mm,
And so this is going to be hard for some people to hear, but really dieting is incompatible with intuitive eating. It's just, you can't do both. And some people want to try to do both, but
mm,
it just is impossible. It won't work.
right.
So you have to approach intuitive eating like a wellness or a well-being habit. You
Mm,
cannot approach it as a weight loss tool. You cannot see it that way.
mm,
And especially for people that have been dieting for decades, like I did, and yo-yo dieting and going on and off fad diets, they approach intuitive eating as another diet, and it's not going to work that way. In order to tune into your body and give it what it needs, you have to trust yourself. And usually, whenever we're trying to restrict calories for the purpose of weight loss, which is what I call a diet, it interferes with that ability to trust ourselves.
mm,
Because really, there's going to be some days where you really truly are hungrier. But if you are trying to restrict your calories, you're going to ignore that and eat a smaller amount. And so your primitive brain is going to take over. You might end up binging later,
mm,
call yourself a food addict eventually, but really what's happening is that you're trying to restrict your calories. So
mm,
that's the very first principle. And I think the next thing is just really being open-minded and exploring. And I think what also is really hard for people, especially if they've dieted for a long, long time, is not seeing foods as good or bad and not having any food off limits. Now,
mm,
I'm also vegan. So they've done studies to show that people that don't eat animal products for the purpose of veganism or because of some other values and principles they hold, it doesn't seem to cause any psychological trauma as far as like wanting to binge on those foods or anything like that. It really helps. So for those people that don't eat animal products, because for that reason, they don't have this unnatural, weird relationship with animal products.
mm,
For some people that may have restricted animal products solely for the purpose of weight loss or dieting, they may still have that pull or allure to those foods or whatever food. I'm just saying that as an example, but it could be that you think that all bread is bad, or you think that all cookies are bad. And so because of that, you just want that thing. And so whenever you get one cookie, you want to eat all the cookies and you don't want to stop. So whenever you start neutralizing foods and instead paying attention to how it feels inside your body, then you can develop a new relationship with food that's healthier for you. So I have this story with Halloween candy. So, as like I said, I spent decades dieting. And so I had a very poor body image, a very disordered relationship with food. I definitely was an extreme binge eater for a long time. I labeled myself a food addict. I no longer believe that that's the case. So I had this problem with Halloween candy where I couldn't just have one piece, and then I would just end up eating all this Halloween candy and feeling awful and blah and all this. So finally, when I neutralized Halloween candy and said, okay, I can eat Halloween candy if I wanted to, and I didn't think of Halloween candy as this bad thing, I realized I do not like Halloween candy. Halloween candy does not taste good to me. Halloween candy tastes like gross processed plasticky stuff. So now there could be like a pile of Halloween candy on the table and I have zero pull to it. And if I really want a good piece of chocolate, I'm going to get myself a high quality vegan dark chocolate and savor it in one piece, and I'm fine. But before, when I was seeing it as a bad thing and trying to control my weight and all of this, it was just a disaster. So these are principles that can take years for people to explore and discover and develop a new relationship with food. But it's a lot easier if we don't start the cycle to begin with, which is why I'm talking to parents about their own children, not putting their kids on a diet, not restricting food, serving good, wholesome, whole plant foods as much as possible. But let's talk about food a little bit differently than we have been, so that we can all learn how to have an appropriate relationship with food and not this disordered push-pull sort of thing.
So what do you do? I mean, so there are some tougher cases, right? So there's maybe some young women with teenagers who have like a body image shaming issue, and that relationship with food is not just even with food, but it's all a lot of external. How do you begin to build a healthy relationship with food with a child that's suffering in their teens? I mean, how would you begin that process?
Well, I talk about setting a positive environment. And what I mean by that is not only what foods we have available in the house. So, as much as possible, let's have an abundance of whole plant foods available, because for teenagers, we know, and the studies show, that they will eat what's convenient. They don't really want to spend a lot of time cooking, teens, they don't have time for that. So, if they just have a bag of chips there, they're going to eat it just because it's convenient, So have the vegetables cut up, have the fruit cut up, have the meals pre-made so that they can just put things together very quickly. So that's one principle. But the other principle of a positive environment is what concepts, what words, what images we put into our household. So if mom's going around talking about how big her butt is, or how she needs to lose weight, or how she's disgusted with her body, even if she's not saying that to her children, that belief gets passed down. If in the coffee table, it's all diet magazines, lose 10 pounds fast, those kinds of things. If our programming is all centered on a specific body type, if that's all we talk about, then these beliefs get passed down to our children. Absolutely, we live in a weight-centric culture. We do. And so there is the thin ideal. It's glorified. It's associated with health. Even when sometimes there's thin people that are not healthy, they are seen as healthy. Larger bodied people are seen as unhealthy. We live in that culture. So in our households, we have to talk about those things. We have to talk about how the size of our body is not the most important thing. The function of our body, how we feel, what we can do with it, the sports we can do, the activities that we can do, that really is the most important thing. So just refocus the conversation of function and well-being rather than body size, and also get those teens off social media. I'm sure you agree with this too, but social media is a trap when it comes to body image. It increases anxiety. It increases depression. There's like no way around it. The studies show that when teens are on social media, especially the visually focused ones like Instagram, I can't even imagine if I had TikTok when I was a kid.
Oh my goodness.
I would have I already had depression when I was a teenager. It would have been way worse,
Right.
So I think just think about those things and know that, we live in the culture. That's what they value. Analyze or evaluate what other family members are saying. That can be tough. Like what are the other caregivers saying to the child about their size, grandparents, other well-meaning family members, and stand up for that.
Right.
Right.
That's a really good question, or thought. I mean, when you're thinking about other members too, not just, mom, or the parents, but maybe the grandparents or siblings to one another, friends. So when you have a mom or just had a baby and stuff, so how do you set up this environment? Like, what would you encourage parents to do from the get-go? If we have someone who's just starting, or they have little ones and they're wanting to get this started, what's the best way for them to learn how to set up this really constructive environment?
So the first thing is whole plant foods. I can't neglect that. The sooner the
Right.
better. During pregnancy even, because that's going to influence the taste preferences of your child.
Mm.
Keep eating them during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, and just keep serving them. Once you start feeding your child complementary foods, get those greens in there, get those vegetables in there, and then follow that division of responsibility. So a division of responsibilities was created by Ellen Satter. So that's what I was mentioning earlier. The parent decides what, when, and where. What are you going to feed the child, when, where? You do want to have a flexible structure. I don't recommend just letting kids graze all day. That
Mm.
isn't supportive of intuitive eating, because then when they come to the table, they're not necessarily hungry.
Mm.
They've been eating all day long.
Gotcha.
So, and then where the best thing obviously is sitting down in a relaxed fashion at the table, at the kitchen bar, whatever. You don't want to be eating on the run, eating while they're playing, while they're distracted. You want to be able to have mindfulness for your eating, and you want to also role model that. So continue
Mm.
yourself to be a role model. Eat your veggies, sit at the table and eat your food, rather than eating while you're on the computer or watching TV, those kinds of things. And
Mm.
so that part is the parent's role. And then the child's role is to decide if and how much. And we know this when our children are babies, because we put them to the breast, they eat, they stop, oh, they're done. We put them down, we change their diaper, whatever. And it seems like, okay, yeah, they know how much to eat. But once they become toddlers, because now their main role is to explore their environment and to run around and to play, and they just have small amounts at dinner, then we start losing that trust. They must not be eating enough, even though the pediatrician or the doctor keeps telling you they're growing fine. As parents, we're getting nervous in our head because we see
Mm.
these small amounts that they eat, and then that's when we start crossing over into their autonomy.
Mm.
So if you just maintain that and you keep practicing it, knowing that you're not going to be perfect. So I'm a parent too. I know that sometimes I look at my younger one, he like didn't touch any of his broccoli, and I'm like, really, again, so I know it happens. Okay. But just do your best, and the most you can follow that division of responsibilities. You role model, you eating your whole plant foods, eating intuitively, being mindful about your eating, and also respecting and accepting your body as it is, and
Mm.
looking more at a well-being journey along with your habits and behaviors, rather than eating to control your body size. And I think if you just keep doing those things, you're going to support intuitive eating in your child, because remember, they're born that way. You
Mhm.
just want to continue it. It's a little
Mm.
bit different once your child has unlearned it, or as an adult you've unlearned it, but it's never impossible. So it's never
Mm.
about giving up hope.
No, I think that's great. And so, I mean, and I have several stories of children and families when they switch to a plant-based diet, allowing the child to kind of learn. For example, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of, and when they moved to a plant-based diet, all the extra fiber caused a lot of stomach issues. We had that transition. She's doing great. But now when they go to a birthday party, or if they go to grandma's house and they offer them pizza or cake, mama allows them to do that, but they don't feel good afterwards. And, a couple of times of that, and the child's like, I don't want to do that again. So
Yes.
that's a really good example that it can be learned. And, and I think mom was super excited because that takes a lot of, fear and burden off of her shoulders, thinking, how am I going to keep this kid from eating unhealthy foods? But let's say that you do have a kiddo that goes to like school or to parties, and they do have this desire to consume these unhealthy foods, and they're out of the house during that time. What do you do with this situation where they may be eating these foods outside of your controlled environment of what you allow in front of them?
Yeah, no, and that story that you told is perfect, because that's exactly what I do with my family. And what I say in my book is that every family has to decide what works for them. Okay. Because I know
Mm.
that there's some families that they feel a little bit stricter. They might be vegan, and that's really difficult for them, for the kid to eat any animal products outside the house. But one thing to understand is that once your kid goes to school, once they're spending time outside of the house, they're going to be exposed to these foods.
Mm.
So if we're super strict and we say you can never have those foods, it has the opposite reaction, because the human brain is like, I want what I've been told I cannot have, and so that's just the way it works, especially for children. So one of the ways to address it is just like you said before, the child has permission to make those choices when they're at birthday parties and the bake sales and the 5 bazillion celebrations that they have at school. But because you've trusted them, because you've given them that ability to tune into their bodies, they actually do really well. It just really has to do with how you want to manage it in your family. And there's not just an all or nothing approach too. You don't just have to say, well, they can just have whatever they want outside of the house. You can take a stepwise approach. Like when my kids were really young, I would take alternative treats, play foods to the classrooms, so that when they had the like 50 million birthday parties, I feel like it's every single day, right? Then they could have their special thing. And then as they got older, first because I got busy, and second of all, because I knew that was no longer as acceptable to them to have a different sort of treat, then they were allowed to make the choice if they wanted to or not. And I find that if I give them that autonomy to do that, they do really well, and they do tune into their bodies. Sometimes when I pick them up from school and they're like, yeah, I had a cupcake and they're able to see what happens, because our kids aren't going to live under our roof forever. They're going to have to go to college. They're going to have to go live their lives. It makes me sad every day, but they have to. And because, they've had these years of practice with us where they've learned to trust themselves, they've learned to be confident around food, then we can feel better about how they're going to pursue their life, what kind of habits they're going to have when they're gone. Because when we demonize these foods and we say, you can never have that, then it becomes so alluring that they can't get in touch with how it makes them feel. They just are more focused on, I just need to get as much as I can of this right now because I know I'm not supposed to, and I know that it's bad or whatever.
Yeah. And this works well too for teenagers, right? So when I moved us literally overnight to a plant-based diet 9 years ago, so the kids then were 13, 15, and 18. And in the home, I said, listen, there's no animal products here. Don't bring it in. And we always said, sodas and other things too that we didn't bring in the house. Like, this is what we're eating. And so what we did is I said, when we go out to eat, y'all order what you want. But we're at home, we're going to eat this. And that actually worked really well. It was very interesting to see over the course of a year and educating, but I was also educating about the foods, the health aspects, the impacts on their athletic activities. And these are rational human beings. Teenagers are going to make their own choices. My daughter went off to college. I had no control over that. But, when she'd come home, I'd educate, we'd go out to eat, and they never really complained about that. But what's funny is you'll see the kids over the course of a year, that first year, they started ordering tofu instead of chicken, or something like that. You start seeing them making different choices. They ordered the veggie burger. But now it's like, they're 22, 24, 26, like I said, almost 27. Emily's graduating medical school in May, and they are literally whole food plant-based eaters. They make better choices. They don't want to do oil. They don't want to, might add a little salt here or whatever. But they also would, maybe order Chipotle on occasion that they know has a bit of oil, but they also know they don't feel the greatest when they can eat a lot of it. But that choice, that allowing that, even in older kids, but if you're just entering into it, like, let's talk about these foods and let's talk about your future and how they're going to do these things in your body, it makes a big difference. And I think it went fairly smoothly, at least from our side of it at home. but I also raise them to, like, you'll eat what you got. So they always felt that power.
And no, I love that approach. That's what I do in my house too, because I'm the main cook here. So like, this is what I'm cooking. And no, my kids, we transitioned when they were younger, so they don't really have any desire to eat meat or anything like that. When they have their treats, it's mostly going to be like cake and cupcakes and those kinds of things at birthday parties. But one time my oldest son accidentally had a bite of hot dog that he thought was a veggie dog.
Oh no.
And I had to do like a full counseling session for this boy.
Oh.
Okay. He was so devastated. It's like, it's okay. It's okay. He didn't know. So I feel like that part, they're pretty on board with.
Yeah.
But it's true because teenagers, they're in that developmental stage where they want to exert their individuality. They're trying to figure out who they are. So we do have to be a little gentler. I think it's perfectly fine to set loving limits, just like you did. Like in this house, we're not going to have this. Or if you even want to go a halfway approach for some parents, they just have like a little cabinet or a little shelf where they can put their teen food or whatever. If that's a choice that you can make too. But I think also, especially if you have younger children in the house, you just don't want to have all that stuff on the counters because what we see affects our hunger too, so you just don't want to have a bunch of processed food sitting around everywhere. So I think that's a totally reasonable approach, but it's almost like teens, it almost has to be their idea. So you kind of have to introduce it, definitely talk about it. And we know like it's undeniable the health benefits of eating more whole plant foods, but we also can't shame them about it. So it's a very fine line. Like we want you to feel good. We want you to perform well in your sports. But if you do choose to eat meat, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just tune into your body and see what happens,
Yeah. And we, in the more recent years, talking about the climate change and their future, their world. So I think it's really important too, for them to connect their choices, not only with food, but other choices with, consequences for the future, for future generations, for themselves. And so, we have some amazing conversations with these amazing adults that we've raised. And I think it all started honestly because just allowing them to do that, because I think that being forced, but I wish I'd understood that even more intuitively, I guess, when they were younger, about different things, not even necessarily food, but if you allow your child to do the play and the different things that, instead of like, you can't go play, you can't go do that because you're concerned. I see that hoveringness and restriction. And, when we were kids, I don't know how we survived, honestly, but we imagined that we actually did some things that I'm like, wow. But, I always tell my husband was one of those ones. He's like, just go let them do whatever they want. And me, I was like, the more like, I'm worried that they're going to get hurt. But what was funny was I always tell parents, I was like, listen, you have dads, and dads allow your children to try new things and explore the world. And your moms are the reason why they survive it. So
yes. Yes.
So
and I think having a pediatrician mom is probably the worst of all, because they're like, no trampoline, no pool, you cannot climb that tree. It's like you just know all this stuff. But it's true. I mean, the only way that they can learn how to move their body and learn how to trust themselves in their movement is through the practice. And the only way to practice is to let them go out there and do that. But I understand as a physician mom how you feel.
Well, there was a reason there was only one semester of football in 7th grade. There and wrestling. But yeah, so for sure. So tell us, can you show us your book and where can we get it?
This is my book. It's so cute. Awesome. It's got little tomatoes with googly eyes.
I love the googly eyes.
It's called The Parent's Guide to Intuitive Eating, How to Raise Kids Who Love to Eat Healthy. And you can find it on all major online booksellers. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that stuff. And a lot of moms have been very successful in getting their local libraries to carry it too. So I'm very thankful about that. And then you can also find out more about it on my website, dryami.com/book. And that's spelled out DOCTORYAMI.com/book.
Excellent. I think that's fabulous. And so any final advice for moms and dads who are raising plant-based eaters, even if it's outside of your book or anything else?
Yes. My main advice is to relax and have fun. I just want you to enjoy this journey, enjoy feeding your child, enjoy feeding yourself. I really think that food should be pleasurable. It shouldn't be as stressful as we're making it out to be. So do your best and know that your child thinks you're amazing. You're an amazing parent. Even all you can think about is all the mistakes you made. Don't think about that. Think about how you can proceed forward, how you can have fun with it. And just like, Dr. Marbus was talking about, have conversations with your child and just do your best and enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. And the more you can get your kids involved in making the food, picking out the food. Honestly, we'd done this even before we went plant-based. We'd go pick out what fruit or veggie we had never tried. Like, this looks interesting. Let's learn about this. And actually it encourages that exploration and curiosity. And curiosity is really important when it comes to mindfulness, because you're curious about what's going on in your body. Allow
Yes.
your child to do that, not be ashamed about the curiosity of what's going on. So it's a superpower. So absolutely. But thank you, Dr. Yami, for all your amazing insight and wisdom and how we can raise our kids to have a healthy mindset and a healthy body. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was super blast.
Thank you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Before you go though, please hit the subscribe button and the alert button so you will be notified whenever we upload any new videos. On Monday, we upload the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. Now, if you'd rather listen to the podcast, you can find it on all the major platforms, such as iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and even Spotify. On Tuesdays, we upload the Doctor's In. This is where I answer your questions. Thinking of that, could you please comment below any questions you might have about health or wellness, or any topics that you would like me to cover? Now, if you're looking for more resources on how to start a plant-based diet, sustain a plant-based diet, exercise, recipes, anything regarding wellness, we've got you covered. Check out healthyhumanrevolution.com. And again, thanks for watching.